Okay, before I get started, I would just like to warn all of you that this is not going to be like most of my other videos, where I calmly and objectively speak on a rather specific topic. Today, I'm going to be speaking very plainly about my opinions on a couple of different topics, though they will still tie back to the title of this video. But I may be prone to getting a little passionate, angry, ranting, and possibly getting a bit off topic. And if that's not your kind of video or something you don't think you want to stay and listen to, please feel free to skip over this video and tune into the next one. Now, if you're still here, and if you are, thank you for giving me a chance, let's get into it. Now, what inspired me to make this video was mainly a combination of two things. The first being the video I made about 2 weeks ago talking about why the exposition scene at the end of Psycho was an important one. And you can find a link to that video in the description below if you're curious. Now, I was originally going to talk about this in that video, but decided to just stick to the topic of exposition, though I still briefly touched on this issue. Basically, at one point I bring up how people have openly mocked and brutally attacked that scene simply because they don't understand why it was put there to begin with and almost seem to be under the impression that Alfred Hitchcock wanted to see how long he could go on before the audience got bored, which is obviously not why that scene is over 5 minutes long, as I go into in that video. And this is only just one example of that. You wouldn't believe some of the things I've heard people say about these classic movies. And not on their social media pages where people can just ignore them either, but on legitimate movie sites where people will take their opinions at face value, outright making fun of and criticizing masterpieces over the stupidest stuff. But just so I don't accidentally put a target on anybody's back, I won't be mentioning any specific sites here. But considering some, though definitely not all, don't get me wrong, of the stuff that passes for entertainment today, the fact that people have the nerve to be attacking legitimate works of art almost sickens me. Because here's the thing, I'm not even the biggest fan of Psycho. It's nowhere near the top of my favorite Alfred Hitchcock movies, and isn't something I watch very often. But I still respect it, and most certainly understand what it did and how it revolutionized cinema. So to see people treating it like it's just your run-of-the-mill movie that anybody can just make fun of is something I do not appreciate. If you ask me, there are certain movies that should be immune to such things, and Psycho should be one of them. I will freely admit that. Now, please do note here that I'm not saying it should be exempt from criticism, because nothing should be exempt from that. But what I am saying is that there are certain movies that should always be shown respect, no matter when they were made or how overexposed they feel in pop culture. So what I'm basically getting at here is, if somebody thinks the explanation scene drags down the film, then they're free to say it because they're talking about quality, even if a debate can be had of whether or not they're right. However, if you think Norman stuffing his swamp with cars is funny, don't go posting that on official movie sites that movie buffs will be taking seriously. Because that's exactly what they do. Go around posting their opinions on these sites like they're the be all to end all 100% fact. And the hypocrisy is amazing too. For example, all the time they're screaming for more complex characters that learn a lesson, and when you get a movie that has one, nope, she's boring. He should have gone with the more fun one who has almost no characterization. And that's treated as fact. Never mind that it would have been completely out of character for him to do that and would have screwed up the entire moral. Okay, maybe I'm getting a little carried away here. And before you say it, yes, maybe I should stop reading from these sites. But the point is, other people are still going to, which is what I think is the problem. They'll read these opinions masquerading as fact and take it as is. And I just don't think that's fair to them or the movies that are being discussed. But to get closer to the topic of this video, that's exactly what I believe is another problem. Older movies just don't get the acknowledgement or respect they deserve from popular culture as a whole. Most of them are completely forgotten, and the few that aren't are subjected to ridicule by these morons, though some do get it way worse than others, don't get me wrong. Especially It's a Wonderful Life, and in a completely different way, The Thief of Baghdad. Don't even get me started on those two. But if you're really curious, let me know in the comments and I'll consider doing a whole separate video for both of those. And yes, there are my share of older movies that I hate and would never say a good word about, but the difference is I'd never mock them. I'd argue all day long why they don't deserve their reputation, but I would never resort to that. Nor would I start posting my opinions on what are supposed to be factual movie sites that people go to for facts. My point is, I know where to draw the line, and I wish these people would as well. But to get back to what I was saying, and this is mainly the second reason I chose to make this video, the 30s, 40s, and 50s are known as the golden age of Hollywood for a reason. Sure, maybe their movies are a bit dated in some ways, and maybe over half of them are in black and white. But most of the time, they still make for a great movie. You wouldn't believe how many movies I've seen from that time that I'd almost go as far as to call masterpieces that nobody's ever heard of. Though, given what these people do to the ones that are, maybe they're honestly better off that way. But my point is, in the past 30 years, there have been countless pretty bad movies that everybody knows and talks about, while genuinely great ones from back when are completely forgotten simply because they were made back then and not today. And yes, sometimes things don't age well, sometimes they were never that good to begin with, but I'd say that about 95% of the movies made before 1965 have been completely forgotten. And considering that's essentially the entire golden age of Hollywood, you do have to admit that there are probably at least some good movies that have been unfairly left in the dust. And that's where we finally get to the topic of the thumbnail. Because did you even know that Cape Fear was actually a remake from a 1962 black and white movie starring Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum? I mean, I'm sure some of you did, but I'm sure just as many of you more casual moviegoers didn't. Now, the thing is, I'm not trying to say that the remake is bad. Robert De Niro is absolutely terrifying as Max Cady, and is a rather solid horror thriller on the whole. But the thing is, so was the original. It's pretty similar to the remake, though obviously the two have their differences. The horror element might not be as prominent, and maybe the feeling of fear isn't quite as palpable. And Robert Mitchum certainly doesn't play Max Cady as an openly evil religious fanatic who will gladly take chunks out of people's faces. Quite the opposite, actually. He plays Cady in a very subdued fashion, to the point that if you didn't know him, you'd almost think he's friendly. And because of that, he can be just as scary as De Niro, but for different reasons. Seeing such a supposedly calm man go into a rant about how he'll get his revenge and how horrible prison was without ever once losing his cool demeanor, or the way he just stares at his prey's pre-puberty daughter, all while covering his illegal activities at every turn. And maybe the movie doesn't end with a huge fight on a houseboat in a raging river where he's set on fire, but he does deliberately drown a cop while mumbling to himself, he just fell in and drowned, and comes uncomfortably close to getting his revenge on him through his daughter. Now, if you haven't gotten it already, all I'm trying to say here is that the original really could be considered as good as the remake, especially when it comes to Max Cady and the two actors' very different but equally terrifying portrayals of him. And yet, only one is remembered today by virtue of the fact that it came out second and had a rather famous cast and crew behind it. And again, I'm not saying that the praise isn't deserved, just that the original arguably doesn't get proper credit because it's older and in black and white. And another good example of that would be Cleopatra. Now, disregarding the Patty Jenkins movie, if anybody brings up a movie with that title, everyone will immediately think of the 1963 movie starring Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, right? However, how many of you knew that there was a version released in 1934 starring Claudette Colbert of It Happened One Night fame and directed by Cecil B. DeMille? Or that both movies were actually remakes of a now lost 1917 movie? But to stick to the versions that can still be watched, everybody's heard of the 63 version, if only for its horrible production involving the infamous affair between Taylor and Burton, and the fact that it almost bankrupted the studio. But the fact still remains that if you've seen even parts of a feature film named Cleopatra, it was that one. Despite the fact that the 1934 DeMille version is actually considered by critics, movie experts, and even just regular people to be the superior version. Now, sure, it's not perfect, a bit slow, and its age does show, but that doesn't mean it isn't a good movie or that it doesn't deserve recognition, because it does. Nobody did Shakespearean tragedy on film quite like DeMille, and this movie may have just been one of his best efforts in that field. And yet, it remains mostly forgotten, and the 63 one gets all the recognition, made even worse by the fact that it's mostly for all the wrong reasons. But because it's newer and had actors people today would be more likely to know, it's the one everybody's familiar with. And I'm not trying to say anything bad about anybody who worked on the 63 version either. In fact, I'm actually pretty sure I like everybody who was involved in it. All I'm trying to do is point out that if people want quality entertainment or a story to go in a different direction than they're expecting, maybe they should look a bit more to the past. Because as I've spent half the video stressing, there really are plenty of perfectly good and even great movies from the golden age of Hollywood out there that have been totally thrown aside. And you might just find that they're worth more than most people give them credit for. And trust me, I do speak from personal experience when I say that. As I've said before, I'm not here to lie to you. In this case, I just wanted to throw my opinion on an issue that most movie buffs don't seem to address. That the past does have good things to offer, and if more people were willing to give it a chance, maybe they would come to understand why it's known as Hollywood's golden age. But if you still prefer today's movies and feel that the past was only a stepping stone to get to now, that's your prerogative to think so. I'm only here to express my opinion, not make you agree with it like these people on some of these movie sites try to do. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it off there. And if you're still here, thanks for listening through all of that. And sorry for all the rambling and if this video seems a little incoherent, but I just had a lot I wanted to cover and feel a little strongly about if you haven't guessed. But now I'd like you to tell me, do you think older movies should get more respect and treated as entertainment worth watching? Or do you believe that today's movies are better than anything the past has to offer? Please let me know about that or anything else I covered in this video in the comments. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.